Okay, this is obviously because I have a particular relationship with this film, but it's
Just explain what you mean by that.
Oh well, I did the music for it, but it's the kind of apotheosis of the family films that we've been looking at. It's the happy family unit. They are Tom and Gerri are a happy couple with a happy son. There are no secrets lying in wait, and I suppose therein lies the drama, because the friends that they have are deeply troubled in very particular ways, and it's a very interesting dramatic structure that presumably just emerged out of rehearsals in the usual way.
In a way, that's what I wanted to make a film about. That very conundrum, that very situation. It's interesting what you say about the son, because on the face of it, he's quite, together. But actually, he's not got a partner, and he obviously wants one, and he's,
But he acquires one.
He certainly does.
Fairly painlessly.
Good luck to him. Yeah.
Yes, no, quite. And she's very sparky and very nice. And
totally.
So we have every reason to believe that
he's all right, really.
Yeah.
Sure.
But the true. The film. It's wrong to say the film is about the non-family members, because unusually for you, you have a very a fractured structure. It's a cyclical thing. You've gone for the seasons. Unique, absolutely unique in terms of your films. How did that come about?
Well, it came about by accident, actually, because I was evolving the story and the stuff. And in the long preparatory period with the actors. Now, of course, what happens always is that there's an agreed time between myself and the cinematographer and the designers, the production and costume designer, particularly the production designer, where I have to say, this is what we're doing. Because at first, it's open. It could be, nobody's quite sure what we're going to be doing. And apart from being able to say, well, broadly speaking, I think it's about this kind of area and we're talking about this kind of location, as much as anything, it's sharing with the cinematographer, who again is, as always in the case of this film, Dick Pope, the kind of look, the feeling, the spirit of the film. So, I was able with Naked to say, it's dark, it's nocturnal, it's, going on a solo journey, blah, all that sort of thing. With this film, I think I was a little bit vague, really. And Dick Pope said, well, okay, I'll shoot some, because we'll shoot some tests, to different looks, different, qualities of film, and lighting and colour and so on. So after a bit, he said, okay, well, I've shot these tests. And we arranged to go into one of the preview theatres in Soho at 8 o'clock in the morning. At a point when I was really pulling together the premise, the dramatic premise of the film. And so we arrived, and he said, now look, he said, here's the thing. I'm not quite sure what you want. There are 4 different looks here, and you've got to decide which one you want. And I sat there, and it was only a few minutes, it's only short bits of film, And I sat there, and I had this real clairvoyant flash. I came out, and he said, okay, well, which way do I said, we want to use all of them. He said, you can't. I said, yeah. The film's going to be in 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and each one will have its own look. And that liberated him, and it liberated me. It gave me, it fed back into this. Apart from anything else, this demonstrates how the creative process is not a linear thing. You know, there are things feed back into them. One thing leads to another, and then you re-evaluate what it is. It clarified for me what I was doing with the narrative and what needed to happen to the character.
Okay, so question. This revelation, the revelation about the 4 different looks and revealed to itself
once you get that idea, then you grow it, and you know.
Okay. Can you remember where you were in terms of the story of Ronnie, the brother, Jim?
Oh well, yes. I mean, I can't remember where we were. No, I can't remember actually. Sorry, no, I can't. But it's academic, because what was for sure was that we began the whole journey by creating the 2 brothers, because they're the earliest in the chronology of the people's lives. Plainly, there had to be a dramatic reason to involve Ronnie, who was otherwise locked away in Derby.
Derby, yeah.
But we'd built into I had built into the thing what would be the inevitability of his wife's demise, and therefore that gave us the funeral and the idea that they would bring him down to London, you know, grew out of that, because he's, you know, especially after his son had behaved so badly at the funeral. It's hard, you know what, to be honest, it's a little bit academic to know which idea came for, you know.
Well, I suppose what I'm after is the simultaneity of these things all growing together. They're all happening at the same time, and one thing informs the other.
I mean, what's for sure is that, I mean, and this goes back to how we make the drama happen, apart from anything else, is that, okay, we'd shot quite a lot of the film. We didn't know how it was going to develop or end. Leslie Manville playing Mary only knew what she would know, obviously. She knew that there was a gap in the shoot. We'd been doing something. What she didn't know is we'd all gone to Derby for a week to shoot the funeral stuff. And so we then, in the house, an improvisation was set up where she comes round and they're not there and Ronnie's there, and we explored that. Well, and that gave us the end of the film. Of course, we'd already done all the stuff where she was in the dog box with them because she behaved badly on a previous occasion and so. But you know what? It's all academic, because the important thing is that's the story and it seems to have a meaning and we arrived at it.
And from my point of view, going right back to where we started with Bleak Moments and the generating of a dramatic shape to these ideas, you've already said something that I think is very key, which is that you start off with the 2 brothers and the story generates itself kind of out of that.
Well,
seed.
You start off with the 2 brothers because that's the only logical place to start.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I did a Q&A about this film somewhere else recently, last year, I think. And somebody asked the question, which character did you start with? And I said, okay, what do you think? And everybody said Mary.
Oh, that's
because
interesting.
Mary is absolutely not the logical place. The only logical place to start is to these 2 brothers in Derby and their friend, his friend, all in Derby. Because then, you know, you have to go through the whole, Tom's whole childhood and development, and then he goes to university, and then he meets Gerri, and you know, that's nothing to do with what you then got all this stuff on the go, and then you can use it in its according to your dramatic requirements.
Exactly. So that
I mean, you know, Gerri works at this health centre, and of relatively marginal importance is this woman who's a secretary there, you know. But you develop that relationship and the habit of her coming round and all the rest of it. And sorry, and of course we were talking a little bit earlier about, somebody asked me before about what images to start a film with, and we'll come to the start of this film separately. But one of the things one of the tricks I love to get up to is that, you know, Mary is not, on the face of it, the central character in this story, but she doesn't half have a pull off the stunt of becoming it, you know. Even though on the face of it, she shouldn't be, really. You know.
But I suppose, hard to ask this, but were you aware somewhere along the line, somewhere during it, you must have realised that she was going to be the emotional?
Well, no, I mean,
clout of the
all
film.
the things in it are all there to be explored. I mean, you know,
it's difficult. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, the bottom line is it is what it is, and that's as a result of the creative process.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the beginning.
Yeah, talk about the beginning, because it's the classic false flag, isn't it? Where you think it's going to be about
Imelda Staunton's character.
Yeah.
Yes, and also, I mean, of course, no disrespect to Imelda Staunton or indeed Michelle Austin, who plays the doctor in the thing, that of course actually that scene is about Gerri, because it's about the need for therapy for this woman, this completely resistant patient. No, but I mean, I just like as I said before, I like the wheeze of saying it's about this woman, and it's not about this woman at all. It's about somebody. Yeah.
But to me, it's about playing it's about not getting bogged down in standard exposition.
Well, that may be true, but I think I can give a more responsible answer to this than I just have, because it is there is the wheeze aspect of it, and I don't deny that. But also, more importantly, and I think this is a more central importance, by starting with that, and then it being about these other things, you set up a dynamic tension between those things, and that dynamic tension earns its keep in its own right. It informs our, how do I put it? I was going to say our worldview, but that's wrong. Our perception of the world that we're looking at in some way. And I think that's, although that operates at a subliminal level for the audience, I think that's what it's about, really.
Yeah, because the opening scene is about a troubled person who is resisting help. And that's going to be absolutely relevant
sure.
in the whole relationship of Mary and Tom. And
yes, and also
Mary.
it resonates with other things that happen in the film.
Yeah, with Ken in particular. And also you get a snippet of Phil Davis's character having some kind of problem. His
wife's dying, yeah.
You know, and you don't exactly know what it is. You've got this immensely troubled nephew that Martin Savage plays. You don't know the root of it. You see a taciturn father. The anger in Martin's characterisation is absolutely...
one of the great performances.
It is fantastic. And unforgettable. I mean, he has so little screen time, but you don't forget that in a hurry. And again, as with Leslie, you have these two actors who are massively transformational. If you look at Martin Savage and Leslie Manville in your films, they couldn't be more varied. Or
well, that's the thing about, you know, versatile character actors, which all these people are, and that's what I like to work with, you know, obviously.
How did you feel about the reception of Another Year? Was actually fantastic. It's a very well respected and admired film. I've got no idea whether it made any money or not.
Not a lot.
No, but critically,
sure,
it did incredibly well, didn't it? Does that please disturb?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, well, filmmakers say I don't care what I do, because it's important. I make films for audiences and to share, and so yeah. The more successful, the more liked or respected or celebrated or enjoyed a film is, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
There's a kind of, I was thinking just on my feet about All or Nothing, which I had never compared this film to before, apart from the fact that we've grouped it in this family thing, and I can see certain through lines because of that. There is a kind of lightness of tone. I would say that All or Nothing, just to compare it briefly, is very much a lament, and I felt that about Andrew's music to it, whereas this is much more elegiac in tone. Would that be fair?
I suppose so. In a way, that's for you to say. Not
no, fair enough. But it wasn't in the making.
No, I don't think in those terms, really.
Right, I've asked all mine. Your questions now. Yes, there's one.
Hi, big fan of your work. I just had a question in regards to the creative process and more about Mary's character, played by Leslie. I was wondering if you said that the process didn't start with her, that she came in quite late, and yet it's interesting that you finished the film on her. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, the truth is that the process is the process, and that's just a way of arriving at the premise. But it is about what it's about, and it seems so. How it ends, and it seemed very natural to do what we do, which is to track all the way around the table and to end on her while they're all having a good time sharing, and she's excluded from that, But that's got nothing to do with the. If you look at the way all kinds of things are made, in not least buildings, you would imagine that, according to the most logic, that goes in, then that goes in, and that goes in. But in fact, it's not like that. There are different, this bit has been pre-arranged somewhere else. And, in the end, what matters is what's there, what it is when you get there. So I don't really want to talk about the mechanics of the process, because all that is, and we've already said it, is that in the case of this particular dramatic premise, characters that knew each other grew up together or grew each other a long time ago plainly came into existence first, and the ones that joined them more latterly came into this world more latterly.
Thank you very much. I think I didn't express myself correctly. What I meant to ask was, I wanted to discuss a bit more with you Leslie's character, just to understand a bit more how she goes from the visitor in their lives to someone who has a lot of importance, and then you very interestingly did end on her. So I just say exactly what the question is. I haven't got it.
Why
did you end on Leslie at the end of the film? Why is she the last shot? That was my question.
Well, I've just said that, really, that we're looking at. She comes round. She is by this stage. She's persona non grata there. She knows that, but she's come round, and they're very nice about it, and they say, okay, we'll stay for supper, and they're all being very relaxed and chatting about this, that, and the other. The brother Ronnie's not saying very much because he doesn't, but he's a bit out of his depth. But they're chatting, and the way that I shoot it is relevant to the question you're asking, which is that we gradually do something I don't do very often, which is the camera of its own volition just tracks round, and they're chatting about being at university and various things and their holidays, and it, you know, creeps on, and gradually we get to her and we come in on her, and I have to remind you, in relation to your question, that what's going on isn't just it's a close-up on her. It's a close-up on her, but we are hearing the kind of relaxed conversation having that she is excluded from. So it's the dynamic between what we hear and what we see that's the dramatic end of the film. So we could have ended it with cutting to them all talking and just a shot of her listening and things, but it's just using the film language to focus in on that and to heighten that dynamics of those tensions.
It reminds me of when we get to Topsy Turvy, that the film does not end with either Gilbert or Sullivan, but ends meaningfully, very beautifully, on what appears to be a peripheral character. And we'll get to that one.
But of course that may be true. But in this context, I mean, she's not a peripheral character.
No, indeed not.
But the important thing about your question is it is not about. I mean, it doesn't go to silence. It eventually goes to silence because it's the end of the film. But it's what we're listening to as well as what we're seeing that is the dramatic. The dramatic dynamics of what I'm sharing with you at that point.
Right. So myself and a few other people in this room are in the screenwriting program at London Film School, and I just wanted to ask a question about a process, because this is a very mature film of yours, mature film in your career. We're at the exact other side of that, and we are encouraged to ask the following two questions, probably more than any other, when we're writing. One is, what's at stake for your characters? And another is, what do your characters want? And I'm just wondering, are those questions that still occur to you, do you think they're important? And if not, are there questions that you find yourself asking more than any others about your characters and about your story?
That's a very good question, but it's also a very difficult one. I mean, I suppose I would have to say, first of all, there are a number of different things in what you've just said. First of all, to me, with reference to the two things that you are encouraged, two questions that you are encouraged to ask when you're writing a screenplay, my reaction to that, to that, those notions, would be that those questions are very good questions, very legitimate questions, and very useful questions, but they do not constitute a ready-made solution to the problem, because because in the end, the questions that you may ask are not necessarily conscious questions. They may be implicit in your instincts about developing your story, are such that there are many questions, and that those to isolate those questions is kind of reductive and, to some degree, I suppose I would say dangerously irresponsible, really. So that's one thing. Now, in relation to you asking me that question, because I don't sit down with a blank piece of paper and have to ask those questions, because I start by investigating characters in all their three-dimensional complexity, that those questions, like what does the character want, what was the second question? What's at stake? They are implicitly being dealt with. They're not something that I don't sit down with Leslie Manville, who's playing Mary, and say, okay, two key questions. What does your character want and what's at stake? Because quite frankly, it would be reductive in the extreme and not very and counterproductive. Where would we start? But on the other hand, we know when we're developing this whole woman's life and the way that she, plainly she was brought up to see herself as brought up to be in a terrible way, to be gorgeous and there for men and all that stuff, and that gradually as she's got older the men are falling away and the guys aren't there, and she's looking into that black hole of maturity and old age, and the guys aren't, all that stuff. I mean, already in what I'm describing are the answers to those two questions. But you can't isolate them down into a kind of Mickey Mouse, Pluto wants the bone in this cartoon. This is not as straightforward as that, really. And that is my answer to your question.
And again, we get back to these things that working organically in the way that you do renders the kind of with huge respect to the film school and all the other thousands of courses around the world, they're trying to deal with a kind of mass-produced procedure, an established procedure, and you're just not doing that.
No, it's true. But you know what? I would just I take that, and of course, but just in relation to the two questions. I mean, if as an exercise, if I set you the exercise of saying, well, 2 questions isn't enough, there ought to be 20 questions. Now, I don't agree that that's necessarily one should perpetrate this kind of formulaic approach, but just for argument's sake, I mean, and I'm not suggesting that you sit here now, think up the other 18 questions in our presence, but, maybe there are 20 questions or 100 questions, but immediately it becomes a question of, yes, but who are we talking about? And then what is the at stake? And what is the, what are the options of what the character wants? And so on. And does the character know what he or she wants, and all sorts of things? Thank you for your question.
One PS, that the risk of that is that you end up with a slot of rather than a character. That
it's a risk.
Yeah.
But in the end, you could ask the same question. You could pose the same premise or the same formula, if you like, or whatever you call it, to novelists, say.
Yes.
Yes. It's exactly the same thing. Well, novelists arrive at the complexity of what happens in their novels by all sorts of different means. And, it's about the complexity of humanity that we're talking about, really.
Very good. Well, great questions, though. Yes, thank you. Hello.
You very kindly explained about how Imelda Staunton's in the opening scene and the reasons for that, and not featured a great deal else. This is the first of your films I saw at the cinema when it first came out, and I remember when we left, my friend turned to me and said, "Oh, I thought Imelda Staunton had been in it a bit more." You mentioned in a previous talk that your relationship with the production studio. I wondered, did you get any pushback from the studio about her not featuring in it as much?
Absolutely not. Never heard of it till this moment. Oh. And actually,
thank you.
Just as a matter of purely anecdotal interest, when I set about putting together this film, I said to Imelda, "Will you be in it?" And she said, "Well, I can't. I'm not available until I can only join the rehearsal very late in the day," because she was doing something else. I can't remember what it was. And so I said, "That's fine. It'll be a minor character, but it'll be very useful. I don't know what it'll be." And so she joined in, and we put together that character and that premise just at the late stage of the preparatory rehearsals. And that was it. So it was a function of that particular a situation. But she might otherwise, had she been available, would have made a completely different film in which she played a character that you saw a lot of. But that's in the nature of cutting your cloth according to its length.
Thank you.
Anybody? Yes, hello.
He's back.
He's back.
The man from down under is back.
It's nice. We're getting to know the audience. It's great.
Really easy question. So trying to get my head around all the how you're doing all the improvisation, and I think you just do the characters come in and go, and you have actors?
Say again.
When you're doing the rehearsals, do you need to bring halfway through, think, oh, I want another character, and bring more actors in, or indeed have one think, no, I don't need that role anymore?
No, no to neither things. I once did a play at the Royal Shakespeare Company called Babies Grow Old, which was about doctors. And uniquely, we got in a whole bunch of people, actors, to be quickly cook up patients in the surgery, so that the doctors could practice being doctors. They did it for nothing, and I took them all for lunch. And that's the only time I've ever done that. No, I mean, it's not a practical thing to do. As to dumping actors, no, my commitment is to, if an actor's in it, then they're in it.
So, sorry to ask another question. When you say you don't have a storyboard, you have in your mind then how the story's going to go all the way through it?
I talked about a storyboard in the earlier session in relation to the question about how I work with the cinematographer. And a storyboard is actually a series of actual drawings of the shots. That's not the same thing as what I think you're talking about, which is a scenario of the thing. Now, I do write a scenario, a structure, very late in the day, just before the shoot, of necessity, partly for myself to have some sense of structure, and it gets deviant. It hasn't got detailed scene information, and it's just a sort of premise for each scene. It's partly for myself, but also it's a practical thing so that we can plan out the shoot and location, all that. But that's a scenario, not a story. A storyboard is a visual thing, basically.
That answers the question. I was trying to work out how you put the whole film together in your mind to start off with. Thank you.
I mean, I do. When I'm at the stage, that stage when I put down a sort of the scenario of the thing, I always work by myself for a couple of days. I mean, I just go off and do that, and I usually do it in whatever building we've been rehearsing in, rather than doing it in my flat. And I do actually do a kind of strict cartoon version of the film with post-its and arrows and then move things round. So I do that, but that's just to do with working out the order of things, the structure that you talk about a lot. Not the visualization of it.
Yeah, to me that structure is it's constantly changing. It's not a structure in the sense of the building that you described earlier. Buildings. No. It's not the foundations or the substructure of the building.
You mean it changes during the shoot?
It's alive in a way that...
Yeah, I mean, it's a premise to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, with a lot of the films, including this one, as I've already said, I mean, we don't actually know how they're going to end, apart from anything else.
No, and things, for example, like titles come late. This was untitled 2010.
Oh, I always think of the title very late. And the only film we've made which we knew long in advance what it was called, and it was called, that was Peterloo, because it was going to be about the Peterloo massacre, and it's a fairly non-negotiable fact, really.
Yeah.
That is what it's about.
Yeah, which we'll get to in due course. Yeah. Have you got another one? I can see. Oh, does somebody here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Since we are in the unique position of having the composer of the film here with us, I just wondered what the process was, and this is a question for both of you. At what stage does Gary come on? What are the discussions that you have about the music, etc.?
Well, I first of all, the important thing is that, as far as I'm concerned, just as with actors and everybody else, I mean, it really only makes sense to me for my own needs and requirements and taste to work with composers who start with an emotional response to the film, as opposed to the kind of film composer who composes movie music that sounds like movie music. Wall-to-wall movie music. Because there's no script, because the good news is that there's no script, what the composer can't do, which very often composers for movies do, which is to start thinking about the sound of the film before anyone's shot anything. That's impossible with this. And so the composer, Gary, can't do anything until we've shot the film. And then as soon as there's anything like, which will happen early on after the shoot, an assembly of the film, in however rough and rudimentary it may be, then you can have a look at it and start to have thoughts, and gradually you'll share your thoughts with me and I'll respond to them, and we'll start thinking about the voice of the film. Do you want to take over?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the atmosphere is very similar to this. It's just it's a chat with a focus, and we often, just as a starting point, the voice, in the sense of the tone of voice of instruments, because we like to use real instruments as opposed to electronic ones. That becomes a subject for us, and which could go on for a while. I'll come up with something, play it to Mike, we discuss it.
Sometimes you get in an instrumentalist to listen to a particular. You write a little bit, and
we didn't need to do that on this because of the nature of the ensemble, all things that were familiar to Mike. I'm happy-go-lucky. I wanted Mike to be sure that the euphonium that I decided would be good to use would be a good idea. So somebody came round and played the euphonium, but there wasn't any need to do that here because it's a very small ensemble and Mike was familiar with all the instruments. So it really is just...
And then of course the other part of the job is for us to go through the film and decide where there should be music and where not, which is a sort of a preliminary decision which we gradually may change or evolve. Now, what is important, I think, is that conventionally on a lot of movies, there's a kind of a committee does all this. Producers are involved and people from the backers and the editors sits in on it and so on. Now, what we do is it's just us, and we make the decisions. Then the editor will come round and tune into what we're doing and make suggestions, and perhaps it'd be better if this was there or not here or whatever. And then we'd share it with the producer. But and then we just do it, and we never have to waste time being insulted by sending it to various Philistines in Hollywood or anywhere else.
But again, that's quite parallel to what happens with the actors, because it's a private thing, and then gradually more people see it, and I'm very grateful for that.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best bits of making a film is the day or days when the music gets recorded. Because you show up at this music recording studio and the musicians show up, and as I've said, very often the guys, they've no idea what the film is and they've just got the stuff. And they sit down, they play it as though they've known it all their lives, because that's what professional musicians do, which is ironical for me, who works for 6 months with the actors before we film anything. And then you hear the I mean, because up to now I've heard it. I mean, in the old days, all I would have done is hear it on the piano. Now Gary works with a computer program called Sibelius. Is that right? Which simulates the sound, but it's not the same as the real thing. You hear it for the real thing, and then the guys, the musicians, pile into the control room, and they're keen to know what it is that they're participating in, and it's played back with the film and the sound and everything. And for the first time, you actually experience what it's going to be, and it's very exciting, and I love it.
It's also molten in the same way that everything else on Mike's films are. In that, on this particular film, it's happened on most of them, I think, something doesn't quite work. That when Mary drives her car to the party, and she's a terrible driver, and the car's a mess, and she's weaving her car. The original cue that I wrote was much more controlled, and Mike, on the day of the recording session, we actually worked with the musicians and freed it somewhat from the more rigid, more highly composed thing that I'd done, and it's much better.
Yeah.
But you've got to just be on your. It's fine if you've got trust. You can do that, and
it's organic.
And it's very organic, and it's very. If you think about that writ large over all the film, then we're all doing that on whatever our department is and whatever it is. It's a very different thing from the storyboarded, independent, storyboarded studio film, commercial film. Anyway, yes, so that's that. The exciting life of the composer. Yes, there's somebody at the back.
Hello. So I have a question, a bit of a comment as well as a question. From all you've been saying so far, it kind of becomes clear to me that the process by which you make your films, instead of being like scripted and dictated and so on, it's more like a flock of birds flies around, in which the behavior comes from the interaction of all the different people who work on the project, and they use like their best creativity to achieve a goal. I thought though it was quite interesting because in the case of Another Year, unlike other films of yours that I've seen, it seems to me personally that it's a lot more subtle. Like, we know what Secrets and Lies is kind of about. We know what Vera Drake is kind of about. But Another Year, it takes a while to kind of realize what it's really about. So I want to ask, in those 6 months you spend with the actors, how do you know, what is the fitness function by which you know during this process of improvisation and collective creation that whatever comes out is what you want or what is wanted? Like, I guess you start from some place, but then how do you know that what you're working on is what you want? And does it ever happen that while you're working on it, the theme maybe, or the idea, or the goal of the film changes and you end up doing something different?
I think at a certain level, with reference to the very last thing you've just said, at a certain level that happens all the time. I mean, it's one of these. I mean, both things happen. It's not extraordinary to hear that how painters paint pictures or novelists write novels, etc. People make music or whatever. You know, how many times have you heard novelists say, well, I didn't really know where it was going, and then it went in a different direction. And making paintings, you know, something will happen that dictates that you explore that, and a different thing happens in a different colour or whatever it is. And that's really what we're talking about. At the same time as, you know, dealing with people and emotions and conflicts and relationships, what starts to present what start to present themselves to me are the possibilities of what I subjectively think are important about these relationships, or about what they mean. So it's kind of, in a way, to answer your question, is all of those things happen, and it's kind of instinctive, really. You sort of, I suppose that I in some way feed that back into choices that I make with the actors, with the characters, and I take from, this thing about exploring things by having improvisations in character. These are very much real, organic, actors really in character, and not trying to be interesting or to write anything, but just to behave the way people really would behave. And there will be no point in exploring things by improvisation if you weren't going to see where things went and follow those things, as well as feed into them to help to guide them in different directions. So it's a complexity of all of those things, and it's a difficult question to answer, as you can tell by the amount of waffling I'm doing in answering it. But it's a combination of all of those things, really. Does that answer your question in some way?
In some way, yeah. I guess to kind of simplify it would be, say you've obtained two different improvisations with the same setup, and they're very different. How do you know which one is the good one? Is there such a thing? Like,
no, because it isn't about. Here's the thing. An improvisation is not an artifact. It's part of a process of exploration and discovery. The artifact is the final thing that you distill and make precise and put on the screen. The final action, the final image, the final dialogue, the final definition of what happens. The improvisations are all part of an ongoing, continuing investigation to arrive at the artifact. So different explorations of situations. I mean, during the preparatory period, there's no question of an improvisation versus another improvisation, because improvisations are chronological. Each one investigates what may happen after the previous one. When we're actually constructing scenes on the location, then we will we'll say, okay, let's start from the same premise again and see what happens this time. So you then have what you're talking about, which is it was better the previous time than this time, or something interesting happened then that we can use and add it to what happened in this one. Because in the end, as I say, the improvisations themselves are only explorations to arrive at what we then make precise. And of course, just to dispel another myth about this, I, as a writer, will quite often say, actually, why don't you say this? But I'm only able to say, why don't you say this? Because in my bloodstream is what the actor, the character, and the nature of the spirit of the thing and the style of the way that, I'm quite often, there are certain moments in the films, in Secrets and Lies, when you get that very much talked about scene in the cafe between the mother and daughter when they first meet, the adopted daughter and the mother who gave her away as a child. During the construction of that scene, we're doing at the point where in the scene she actually says to her, so, when did they tell you were adopted, your adopted parents? And she says, because she's Marianne Jean-Baptiste's character has been brought up by a Bayesian family, and she said, well, on the way back, they'd obviously done. We'd created this in the backstory that her mother told her in the plane coming back from the Bahamas, and she says, and what did you think? And in the film, in the scene, Hortense replies, I just looked down at the clouds. Now, when we were putting that scene together, she said she wasn't sure what she said. And I said to her, why don't you say, I just looked down at the clouds? And Marianne Jean-Baptiste, who's very great to work with, she said, I'm not sure I should say that, actually. It doesn't feel right. I said, well, try it. And after a bit, she said, that's fantastic. That's exactly right, you know. So I tell you that not so much to celebrate what a brilliant line it is, but because it's a combination of drawing from the improvisations, of distilling, putting the scene together, drawing from this improvisation and that moment, and also some input from me, or the actor may say, actually, why don't I say this? You know, because by that time we really are so au fait with the characters and their mode and style that, you know, it's possible to do that. So it's a combination of all the things. I don't know whether that answers your question or...
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, it's less of a technical question, but it was more about the theme of Another Year, and the kind of, it elicited a lot of reaction in me and my friend who came and saw it, and a lot of reaction. Like, we had quite he thought a lot about his mother and her being needy and how he's dealt with that and those kind of things, and then I went through a whole process over like a couple of weeks. Actually, it made me really think about I'm a woman also around that age, and how to, like, what is like...
Around which age?
35. Like, the lady was about...
I think she's a bit older than you, actually.
She's a bit older, yeah. Thank you. But it made me think, and it made me also talk about it with a lot of people, and then with different creatives. And I think one of the best comments I heard from someone was that everyone's needy. And that was the kind of what we termed it as. And that, I don't know, I just wanted, it's interesting to have you here and the...
What's the question?
It was more to express a bit like the last lady. I mean, I read why you also created it, but what was your, I guess, purpose? What did you want to, it evolved probably, but what was the purpose with...
Well, to be honest... what I wanted for you was what you've done what I would wish for.
Yeah, okay, got you. Yeah.
You care. I mean, I care about these people. We talk about Mary, if you like. You know, I care about her predicament. I know, as you may, and most of us do, I know people, not least women, who are, as I said earlier, looking into that black hole. You know, this is, she hasn't got a family, she hasn't got a partner. Now, I don't necessarily think, everybody has to have a partner or a family, or one doesn't want to make generalizations about that. I think she, however, her part of her problem is that she would have wanted those things, and she is a victim of, as I've already said, she's a victim of what is expected of women, and it's catching up with her. I mean, she said, it's terrible when she's trying to, as it were, chat up the lad, and it's embarrassing, it's awful and painful and very, very sad, and one wants to, and of course, to look at someone, and this goes back to the earlier things we've said about how it ends and all the rest of it, is that, you look at that, this predicament in relation to those other characters who are actually, who are lucky. What I want is to, in sharing this these feelings, this pain, these aspirations, disappointment, whatever it is. For you, I want to share it with and get your emotional response that resonates with mine. And it sounds from what you say is that that's what's happened, basically.
Yeah. And it's funny what you said about them being lucky, because that was something that we talked about, that because they had found their partner, or, you know, they were lucky, but if they hadn't, then they would have been in her position. And we were kind of having this, I mean,
life is shit, basically. And, you know, if you're lucky, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, you don't have to look beyond the confines of this room for people who, on the face of it, everything's fine, but actually it's not. There are certain things that aren't, you know, ourselves included.
Or as Phil memorably says in All or Nothing, you're born, you die, that's it.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it raises an interesting question for me, which is this.
Stay with the microphone.
Yeah.
You may want to say something else.
Yeah. I'm just aware that we're hurtling towards the end, but I'll get back to it. When the film came out, one of the things that completely took me aback was a certain line of criticism, was that somehow Tom and Gerri were somehow these dreadful, smug, middle-class people who were unsympathetic to Mary and to Ken and to all the other wounded. Were you surprised by that reaction?
I was surprised, and I was appalled and upset and disgusted. I think it's such a stupid reading of the film. It just made me very, very cross.
It is a bit of a puzzle, isn't it, that somebody could...
There it is. I mean, but I think it's partly, as much as anything else, this syndrome that we're now talking about is to do with people assume that that by definition, art and films are put together in a sort of formulaic way that is an expression of some prejudice or other. And of course, this film is not that at all. It's not. It's this kind of film, I should say. It's you know, an exploration of difficult and emotional and complex things. It's a reflection, if you like, a shared reflection. So I mean that kind of criticism. I mean my play Ecstasy, which we did originally in 1979 at Hampstead, and we revived it a few years ago at Hampstead, as you may recall. I mean that is a study of not for me to say, but it is a sympathetic study of working class characters in a social situation, in a very real and complex way, mostly over an evening, you know. And when we did it originally at Hampstead in 1979, the Radio 3 critics that they used to have at that time, who were all very highbrow and things, were incredibly rude about it, because they said, they accused us who had done the play, us who, by the way, brought to it our own working class experiences and so on. They accused us of being middle class Hampstead snobs, sneering at these working class characters. Dennis Potter, a great writer, for a time did a stretch as the television critic of the Observer, and when Abigail's Party, my play, stage play, was done on television, he was incredibly rude about it, saying that it was a sneer at these lower class people. But, you know, and of course, that was deeply upsetting, because it's not a sneer at all. In fact, it was about us, not about them. It's about us, about society, you know. So all of those things are to do with people coming at it from a sort of cultural assumption, rather than doing what you're talking about, which is to embrace what it is in terms of the actual human, real life experience.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of reading all these things since starting to work with you has been really that you learn more about the people who write these criticisms than you do about their reaction to the film, or what's actually in the film. Anyway, did you want to come forward with anything else?
No, I mean that's an interesting comment that they made for the interpretation, and they wrote to Hampstead to say that, and it's very ironic given your background. But No, I mean, yeah, I like observing. It's a bit like I saw paintings by Goya once, and they're just observing humankind and things, and it's quite nice.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
That's a very good thing. We've reached the end of the session. I can feel it and can see it. I can't thank you enough for joining us on this Q&A day.
Sorry, I didn't, for those of you who weren't here earlier, I didn't make it to the session when it was supposed to happen because I was suddenly found myself in hospital in an emergency, but I'm all right now. But I apologise for not being here when I should have been.
But you're here today, and so were you. And thank you very, very much for being with us and asking such wonderful
Thank you very
questions.
much.